They told us it was just a myth, a fantasy conjured by philosophers and dreamers. But what if the truth was far more shocking and far more dangerous? Imagine this: a thriving civilization, advanced beyond its time, not wiped out by nature, but systematically erased from our history. Not by ocean tides, but by those who feared what it represented. Atlantis, they say, was drowned by the sea. But that's only half the story. The rest was buried beneath centuries of silence, by powerful institutions desperate to maintain control over what we believe is possible. This is Manifestor, and you're about to uncover the suppressed truth they never wanted you to find. Because if paradise had already been built without needing divine permission, what happens to the narratives that claim humanity was lost, weak, and in need of saving? Those who discovered the truth were silenced, their research locked away, their discoveries dismissed. This wasn't just an erasure of ruins. It was a burial of human potential, a war on memory, and the battlefield, church vaults, cathedral archives, and dusty monastery libraries, where history was rewritten with careful hands and political motives. Let's dive beneath the surface, not just metaphorically, but literally, and see what still waits to be rediscovered. Beneath the seas off Japan's coast lies something that defies conventional explanation: the Yonaguni Monument. Towering stone terraces, immaculate steps, and a layout so precise, so geometric, that it resembles a colossal underwater temple. Official archaeologists dismiss it as natural erosion. But since when does erosion carve perfect angles? Since when do waves sculpt flat steps and symmetrical corridors with the care of ancient architects? It looks like a megalithic marvel, but the moment someone tries to study it seriously, things go cold. Research grants disappear. Scientists back away. The site is labeled too controversial. Careers have been destroyed for even suggesting it might be man-made. Why such fear? Why such resistance to simply investigating further? Let's head west, off the coast of India, to a place described in ancient Sanskrit texts as a grand and vibrant city, Dwarka. According to legend, it was the kingdom of Lord Krishna, glowing with wealth, culture, and divine knowledge. Today, its ruins rest beneath the ocean, complete with stone walls, straight roads, and artifacts dating back over 9,000 years. That's before the dawn of agriculture, before the first alphabets were scratched into clay, before we were even supposed to know how to build. And yet, it's there, carved, constructed, waiting. But here's where things get even stranger. The Bimini Road, nestled beneath the clear Caribbean waters near the Bahamas, stretches like an ancient causeway to nowhere. Enormous limestone blocks, laid out in precise arrangements, too perfect to be random, too exact to be accidental. Yet, excavation is restricted. The government says it's too controversial. But we ask, controversial to whom? You see, each of these discoveries doesn't just challenge geography. They threaten chronology. They call into question the timeline we've been taught since childhood. That civilization began just a few thousand years ago, that we stumbled from caves into cities under divine guidance, that we were helpless until higher powers stepped in. But what if that's not true? What if humanity had already built paradise and lost it? If we accept that civilizations existed 10,000 to 12,000 years ago and were then destroyed by rising seas, then the biblical flood narrative starts to unravel. It's no longer about divine punishment. It's about something more grounded, more natural, and infinitely more human. Entire cultures with knowledge, architecture, and philosophy washed away, not because they disobeyed, but because they dared to build without permission. And the resistance to that idea, it's not academic, it's ideological. The power structures that shaped our worldview, especially religious ones, could not allow us to believe that humanity thrived without their guiding hand, that people could create wisdom, beauty, and structure without clerical oversight. So they rewrote the past, turned memory into myth, and labeled any attempt to recover it as heresy. But Atlantis wasn't alone. The pattern repeats across every corner of the globe. Different names, same story. Cultures speak of cities lost to water, of knowledge swallowed by tides. You've likely heard that flood myths are merely echoes of the biblical tale of Noah. But what if that's the reverse of reality? What if Noah's story is just one version of a much older truth, adapted, rebranded, and used to consolidate power? In the cold Atlantic waters off Brittany, France, the legend of the city of YS emerges. A brilliant, thriving city ruled by King Gradlon and his daughter Dot. Protected by bronze gates and advanced engineering, it kept the ocean at bay until one night, the sea claimed it all. Dahet, once revered, was later demonized by the church, transformed from a wise woman into a cautionary tale. But before that rewrite, she was described as a guardian of spiritual knowledge that predates organized religion. Off the Irish coast, ancient sailors whispered of High Brazil, a mystical island said to appear once every 7 years. Shrouded in mist, home to beings who spoke of the stars, healing, and time itself. Some claimed to have reached it, but the island always vanished before anyone else could verify the tale. A trick of light? Or something more? The church, unsurprisingly, called it a devil's illusion, designed to distract from true salvation. Across oceans in the codices of Mesoamerica, we find another puzzle. Civilizations described not just one great flood, but several. Each one sweeping away a society that had become too confident, too intelligent, too independent. Their gods punished them, we're told. But read closely, and you'll see a different message. These people had something powerful, a kind of knowledge, a connection to the divine that bypassed priests, temples, and rules. And for that, they had to be forgotten. And yet, they were not forgotten. Not entirely, because despite centuries of suppression, something survived. The memory endured in stories, ruins, and rituals. And if you're still watching this, if your curiosity is alive and well, it means that spark still lives in you too. If you're finding value in these buried truths, take a moment now and subscribe to Manifestor. We explore the mysteries they tried to erase, the stories that make you question everything, yet somehow feel more real than anything you were taught in school. Let's keep going, because the truth is, not everyone perished when the seas rose. Not every voice was silenced. There were survivors, carriers of forbidden knowledge, keepers of memory. They didn't drown, they traveled. They taught, and they became legends. They came from an age long forgotten, not imagined, not symbolic, but real. These weren't the inventions of mythology or allegory. They were the torchbearers of knowledge that survived catastrophe. From the sands of ancient Egypt come stories of Thoth, a divine figure associated not with temples and prayers, but with writing, science, and balance. But Thoth wasn't alone. He was said to be accompanied by a group called the Shimu, teachers, builders, and initiates of higher wisdom. These people, described in old papyrus scrolls, weren't floating deities. They were flesh and blood beings who brought memory, structure, and purpose from a civilization that existed before the Great Floods. Across the ocean in Mesoamerica, different names emerge, but the story remains eerily similar. Among the Maya, there was Kukulkan. Among the Aztecs, he appeared as Quetzalcoatl. Both were seen as fair-skinned, bearded sages, strikingly different from the local population, who emerged from the eastern seas with one mission: to share knowledge. These visitors taught their people how to track celestial cycles, how to cultivate the land, and how to build in harmony with nature. Their calendars could predict astronomical events more accurately than the systems used in Europe centuries later. Their farming techniques were revolutionary, transforming dense forests into fertile havens. And when their work was done, they didn't declare themselves gods. They promised to return someday. They left not with demands, but with legacies. But here's the most telling part. They never asked to be worshipped. They didn't create religions. They created schools. They didn't demand loyalty. They sparked curiosity. They didn't want offerings. They offered knowledge. And that was a problem, because such figures, such stories, represented something incredibly dangerous to those who controlled the narrative of human weakness and dependency. These teachers didn't tell humanity that salvation had to be earned through submission. They didn't preach that spiritual growth required a middleman. Instead, they showed that connection with the divine, true awakening, could happen through learning, self-discovery, and inner exploration. Now, imagine you're an institution that's built an empire around the idea that only you have the keys to salvation. What do you do when you discover humanity once had the map all along? You erase it, and that's exactly what happened. The church couldn't let these stories persist, not because they were false, but because they were dangerously true. If people believed that humans once accessed divine wisdom directly, without priesthoods, without confessions, without tithes, the whole foundation of spiritual authority crumbled. So, the campaign began. Oannes, once seen as a bringer of light from the sea, was recast as a demon. Thoth, the master of time and writing, was rebranded as a figure of dark magic. Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl became myths, stripped of their historical roots and painted over with superstition. The survivors of Atlantis, those who carried the torch of knowledge, were vilified. Their wisdom declared dangerous. Their legacy censored and buried. But this wasn't about protecting people. It was about protecting power. The idea that civilization had once achieved a golden age, an age of enlightenment, equality, and deep spiritual intelligence, without needing church-approved morality, that was a threat of the highest order. Atlantis, in its truest form, wasn't a city of fantasy. It was a concept, a model of what humanity could achieve when knowledge and spirituality worked hand in hand, where divine connection came from understanding, not obedience, where paradise wasn't promised in some afterlife. It was built here on earth with skill, compassion, and awareness. The Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn followed. They studied the stars, the elements, the forces of the human mind, not as metaphors, but as systems that could unlock a different kind of evolution. Transformation through knowledge, connection through consciousness, not through sermons, but through science of the soul. Then came the Theosophists, Helena Blavatsky and others who openly spoke of Vril, a kind of psychic life force they believed was preserved from Atlantis, a power that once elevated an entire civilization and could do so again. Of course, these groups were never burned at the stake. but they were ridiculed, attacked, labeled as occultists and deluded mystics. But why attack fantasy? Unless, of course, it wasn't fantasy at all. What if these brotherhoods were exactly what they claimed to be? Guardians of a lineage that stretches back thousands of years. A lineage of knowledge, of wisdom, of practical spiritual insight. And what if, despite the best efforts of suppression, that lineage never truly broke? If you're still here listening to this, feeling something stir deep within you, maybe it's because that same lineage echoes through your soul. Maybe you're not just curious. Maybe you're remembering. And that's what terrified the church most, because these hidden networks embodied everything they sought to destroy. The idea that enlightenment could come from within, that the divine wasn't distant, but dwelling inside us, waiting to be awakened not by faith, but by understanding. And the moment that idea takes root, the institution becomes obsolete. So the battle continues. A battle not of swords and armies, but of memory versus erasure, of control versus consciousness, of fear versus awakening. And just when they thought the ruins were gone, just when they believed the records were erased, stones began to speak. Sites are emerging. Relics are surfacing. Structures that simply shouldn't exist do. And each one tears a hole in the version of history we've been spoon-fed since childhood. What if the next ruin we uncover isn't just a curiosity, but a mirror? What if it reflects back what we've forgotten we truly are? High in the hills of Turkey, beneath layers of dust and time, lies a site that rewrites everything we've been taught about our origins. Göbekli Tepe, an ancient temple complex buried beneath 20 feet of earth, was unearthed only recently. And what it reveals is astonishing. Carbon dating places its age at over 11,000 years old. That's 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older even than agriculture. According to mainstream history, humans at this point in time were supposed to be simple nomads, hunter-gatherers wandering the land with no cities, no math, and certainly no spiritual architecture. And yet, there it stands, massive stone pillars, weighing tons, carved with intricate animals, symbols, and celestial alignments. It's as if the builders had knowledge far beyond their era. Knowledge we weren't supposed to possess. But what if they weren't starting from scratch? What if they were carrying fragments of a much older wisdom, something left behind by survivors from a time before the flood? Göbekli Tepe sits on the timeline eerily close to when Atlantis is said to have fallen. And that's no coincidence. If those who fled the collapse brought knowledge with them, this is exactly the kind of monument they'd leave behind. A beacon, a record, a memory etched in stone for future generations to rediscover. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. In 2001, off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans revealed something extraordinary. Symmetrical, geometric structures lying 600 meters beneath the ocean. Early reports spoke of possible pyramids, paved roads, and rectangular stone blocks laid out in patterns far too deliberate to be natural. But then silence. Access was restricted. Independent verification was stalled. The findings were quietly dismissed and buried beneath bureaucratic red tape. And yet, if true, this site would upend our entire historical narrative. It would prove that once whole civilizations stood where now only ocean remains. Just like Atlantis. Just like the stories we were told to call myths. So why the suppression? Why the resistance to exploration? Because each of these discoveries, whether beneath Turkish soil or Caribbean waters, tells the same unsettling truth. that humanity's story didn't begin when we were told it did. That civilization wasn't born in Genesis. It already existed, ancient, wise, and capable, long before our textbooks began. The official story demands that we believe humanity was helpless until divine intervention arrived. But the ruins whisper another version, that we were already building temples, studying the stars, and designing cities before we were supposed to even know what civilization was. And if that truth spreads, the entire foundation of institutional control cracks. But it wasn't just the stones that endured. Something else survived. The blueprint of Atlantis, its wisdom, its principles, its sacred geometry, was encoded in places you'd never expect. Not buried in ruins, but hiding in plain sight. Take the cathedrals of medieval Europe. To the average worshiper, they were places of prayer. But to the initiated, they were something more, monuments of math, harmonics, and cosmic precision. The soaring arches, the rose windows, the exact proportions, they weren't just beautiful. They were blueprints, replications of the same sacred design principles attributed to the fabled city of Atlantis. Plato described Atlantis as concentric circles, perfectly ordered, perfectly aligned with the heavens. Those very same shapes, ratios, and alignments show up again and again in cathedrals, temples, and even modern city grids. Then there were the Freemasons, builders not just of stone, but of legacy. Their tools weren't just practical. The compass, the square, the all-seeing eye, they were symbols, echoes of a science older than religion. A quiet declaration that the knowledge of Atlantis still pulsed beneath the surface of society. Even modern cities like Washington, D.C., carry hints of the pattern. Look closely at the layout, the circles, the radiating lines, the star-shaped intersections. They mirror Plato's description with eerie accuracy. Coincidence? Or was it the work of architects who saw themselves as inheritors of ancient light? And through it all, the institutions watched. They saw cathedrals that didn't just glorify faith, but glorified knowledge. They saw secret orders rising, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. They saw that Atlantis was being rebuilt, not in stone, but in soul. You see, Atlantis wasn't just lost in the past. It's been reborn again and again in every movement that dares to say, we are capable. We are divine. We do not need permission to grow. And that brings us to the most haunting idea of all. What if Atlantis wasn't just a civilization that fell? What if it's a prophecy? What if it wasn't simply about what happened, but about what will happen again? Every discovery, every ruin, every suppressed manuscript whispers the same story. That Atlantis rose because humanity remembered who it was, and fell because it forgot. It dared to reach beyond limits, to fuse technology with spirit, to bend the laws of the physical world with nothing but conscious thought. And look at us now. We've split atoms, mapped the genome, harnessed AI, and reached into realms once reserved for the divine. We stand on the brink of mastering energies and dimensions we once thought only gods could command. The parallels are undeniable. We are walking the same path, one discovery at a time. The question is, do we remember the ending? Because if Atlantis was a warning, then the flood doesn't just come as water. It comes as collapse, as arrogance unchecked, as wisdom ignored. But if Atlantis was a mirror, then maybe, just maybe, it's showing us who we were, so we can finally decide who we want to become. The memory of Atlantis lives on, not in fantasy, but in us. In our architecture, our curiosity, our rebellion against limitation. Every time you question the official story, every time you explore forbidden knowledge, every time you seek a deeper truth, you're keeping that memory alive. So maybe Atlantis wasn't drowned to be forgotten. Maybe it was sacrificed so we could rediscover it when we were ready. And that's where you come in. If this journey has awakened something inside you, if it sparked a question, a feeling, a memory, you're not alone. You're part of something much bigger. You're a seeker, a rebuilder, a mind manifestor. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and stay with us. Because here, we're not just telling stories. We're unearthing buried truths, one layer at a time. The deeper we dig, the clearer the vision becomes. And trust me, we're just getting started. What if Atlantis was never a myth? What if it's a map? And what if you're holding the compass now?